All right, welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. I think we've got about all our panelists here ready to go. Always the new joys of virtual checking attendees list and promoting to panelists. But excited to have you all here today and just really excited for this moment. There's been a lot of work behind this, a lot of momentum, a lot of excitement, and just really excited to be here with you all today to discuss what is officially been adopted and approved, the statewide transitional English course parameters and competency. So welcome everyone. My name is Heather Penzak. I'm a policy and program manager with Education Systems Center out of NIU. Work closely with the group here who's going to be sharing with you all today the course parameters, competencies, and some general policies and background as well for transitional English. So the plan for today, we're going to begin. John Furr, the Executive Director of Education Systems Center, is going to set us off with some background and overview for the need for transitional instruction, some of the background in that work, and also some general policies. And I know some big questions that folks have about transitional English. So make sure that we'll cover those at the front. And then we'll do a review of the content. So the competencies and performance indicators, and really excited to have here today different representatives from our competency development group. So I will introduce them as we move into that section, but these were the people behind the work who had the expertise, drafted those competencies and performance indicators. So they're the best voices to speak to that. And we're very excited and appreciative for them making the time today. And then we'll talk through some next steps. I know there's a lot of questions about what does this mean now? We have statewide transitional English, we have competencies and performance indicators. So what's next? And we'll cover those towards the end. But before I turn it over to John, wanted to do some welcomes here from our state agencies. So I believe we have Kim from ISB.
Yes, hi, Kim Johnson. I'm the English Language Arts Principal Consultant for ISB.
Wonderful, thank you, Kim. And Melvin from ICCB.
Hello and good morning. Melvin Harrison, Director of Academic Affairs with the Illinois Community College Board. Happy to be here and thank you all for joining us. And a special thanks to the Competency Development Group and everybody who has been working so diligently to make this happen. Appreciate the work, and ICCB is in full support of this effort and is pleased with the work that everybody's done. So thank you.
Wonderful, thank you, Melvin. And Amy from IBHE.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Amy Spies. I'm an Assistant Director of Academic Affairs for the Illinois Board of Higher Ed. I apologize, I can't have my camera on this morning because I have kids at home taking their tests this morning. So to save bandwidth, my camera is off. But I did just want to say thank you to all the folks on the competency development groups. The work that was done there was really terrific, especially under the conditions of COVID-19, which prevented us from getting together, of course, and having face-to-face conversations. Nonetheless, everybody put in a lot of time and effort, and I think we ended up with a really great document. And I just want to reiterate what Melvin said about how important this work is and how pleased we are with the result. So thanks for having me. And welcome.
Thanks, Amy, and agree. Sometimes I look back at old photos, I'm like, oh yeah, we used to all meet in person. Wasn't that nice? But we get a lot done still virtual. So thank you all again. I'm so happy to have you all here. And I'm going to turn it over to John now, who's going to take us through an overview of transitional English, transitional instruction generally, and also those general policies.
Great, thanks, Heather. Good morning, everyone. Again, I'm John Furr. I'm the Executive Director for Education Systems Center at NIU. And it's my pleasure to kind of provide you just a general background on how we got to this point with transitional English. So the work in transitional English is derived from the Post-Secondary and Workforce Readiness Act. So this was legislation that was developed over multiple years through the leadership of the state's P20 Council and was enacted in law in 2016. And there's 4 overall components that you can kind of see within the law, establishing the post-secondary and career expectations framework, the pilot for competency-based high school graduation requirements, the statewide system for college and career pathway endorsements. But there was the understanding as part of that work that if we were looking at issues of college and career readiness and not supporting students to enter into college and to be ready for college level coursework, that we weren't having the sufficient focus on student needs as we're thinking about this holistic approach to supporting students to successfully transition to college and on to career. And that's why there was emphasis within the law on transitional instruction, looking at these fourth-year high school courses that can help us smooth that transition to college and to reduce remediation rates. And we've been able to see some of the impact of this overall focus from the state in looking to reduce remediation rates through data that we have available at the state level. So this is data taken from the Illinois report card through integrated data between ISB and ICCB. And you can begin to see here, starting back in 2014, we had about 50% of our high school graduates who were going on to the community college system that were enrolling in at least one remedial course. And this is one of those graphs, by the way, where we're looking for the lower numbers. So low is good here. Over time, as you can see, between 2014 to 2018, with the most recent data that we have available, we have seen a significant drop in those overall remediation rates, over 6 percentage points for the overall rate, with most of that being focused in math, where there's been almost an 8 percentage point drop in remediation rates from 2014 to 2018. Where we haven't seen movement, though, is in those communication rates, which have been hovering around 20% over the time that we've been collecting and reporting this data. And that's what Transitional English is really helping to address, those remedial rates as they relate to those communication courses, those English 101 and those English 102 courses that are provided at the college level. And the reason why we care about students enrolling in remedial coursework is we know that that has a negative impact on student success. And this is shown by the data that's been collected and analyzed by the state that enrolling in remedial coursework leads to students who are completing less of their courses compared to their non-remedial peers. They have substantially lower outcomes in areas such as graduation rate and advancement rate and credit accumulation. And also, as we look at the equity goals for the state, that this is disproportionately impacting African-American and Latinx students who are disproportionately enrolled in remedial coursework, more so than their white peers. So the overall goals for transitional instruction, again, that goal is to reduce remediation and support that readiness for college level courses. And the process is generally one of being able to determine those students who are not college ready for the particular subject area during the junior year, being able to support those students with transitional instruction during that senior year. And based on that, and this is a really key part of the law, is ensuring those students have guaranteed placement based on course completion into those college level courses as they transition. And the results of that is the students are able to start a college level coursework, increasing their chances of completing the certificate or degree, and also again can address the equity related goals that we have at the state level, and we know that many communities are driving toward as well. So in terms of how this is framed up within policy, there are various drivers of transitional instruction that are set out in state law and also tied into some federal law and programs as well. So the PWR Act itself does have an implementation expectation for transitional math. There's been a phased implementation plan that's been adopted by ISB and ICCB, working with the Board of Higher Ed as well, where full statewide implementation is required of transitional math coursework, unless there's a school board process to opt out that's set out within the law. Now, there's no similar implementation requirement within the PWR Act for transitional English, but there are other drivers for implementation. One is the Every Student Succeeds Act. There's a college and career readiness indicator that includes both transitional math and transitional English as an academic indicator within that framework. And perhaps more importantly, the multiple measures framework that's been adopted by the state's community college system includes both transitional math and transitional English as options within that for placement for students. And that framework has recently been codified within HB 2170. That's the omnibus education bill, which is pending the governor's signature as of today's date, which also includes that same measure, multiple measures framework with transitional math and transitional English being incorporated. So I'd like to kind of shift from there to talk about some of the general policies. So these are policies that are set out within the policies and competencies document, and were discussed as part of the work with the state agencies, the Competency Development Group, and have been out for public comment as well. One important aspect of transitional English course that's within the policies is that this course can be used as a fourth-year language arts class to meet state and local high school graduation requirements. So that is a distinction from transitional math, which, because there's only 3 years of math required for high school, there was the expectations that students would complete those requirements before taking transitional math during their senior year. That's not the case for transitional English, which again can meet those graduation requirements, either as a new course or what's typically what we're seeing with a lot of pilots is actually the transformation of an existing English 4 course. What's really key in terms of transitional English courses is that these are intended for students who are not projected ready for college level English as of the end of their junior year. So if students are demonstrating that they're ready for that college level content, then they really should be enrolled in an advanced placement or a dual credit course that's allowing them access to that early college credit. And the expectation within the policies is that high schools are establishing a framework and a guidance system that's supporting students to enroll in that into that senior year English course that's appropriate in terms of where they are for college readiness levels and what their goals are in post-secondary. So if students are able to complete a transitional English course with a grade of C or better, they're guaranteed placement under the state level policies into the college's accepting courses that are tied to the Illinois Articulation Initiative communications related courses. So those are listed there, again, typically referred to as English 101 or English 102 or speech, but that provides a guaranteed placement into those courses. And also for any other course that has a reading placement requirement or requires placement into those courses described above. So many colleges say that, for example, to take a psychology course that you have to also place into English 101. So transitional English would allow for placement into those courses in addition to those core communications courses as well. One of the core frameworks in terms of delivery locally is that this work is really, you kind of saw this reflected by the state agencies around that secondary, post-secondary collaboration that has to happen at the local level as well. So there's the expectation for that local partnership agreement between the high school and their local community college who are grading to a grading structure that's conforming to the grading and assessment requirements that are in the Transitional English Overview and Course Parameters. And as you look at that document on page 4, there are some specific parameters around grading which courses need to be able to adhere to. There's the expectation that the content, the pace, and the assessments will be documented according to the requirements that will be developed by the Transitional English Portability Panel. And then also, again, that there's support for those high school teachers who are developing that courses with that partnership between the local community college and the high school. Portability is a key part of the transitional instruction system within our state. And portability, as you begin to think about it, it's really looking at that consistency of the coursework between the high school and the community college. And the portability panel is supporting the review of that coursework to ensure that level of consistency with state policies and requirements, very similar to what the Illinois Articulation Initiative provides for looking at coursework that are being used for transfer from the community college to the university system. And part of this process, again, looking at quality control, making sure that the panel is reviewing that the state competencies and policies are being met. And that provides the ability for the assurances for community colleges and accepting universities to be able to accept that course for portability as they are moving forward. One of the other key aspects that we've certainly learned in the implementation of transitional math is that the local advisory panel is also really critical to making transitional instruction work. And that is an expectation within the policies, is that there would be a local advisory panel that's established to submit and to interact with that state portability panel. And that would have representation from the set of school districts that are part of the college's feeder high schools, along with representation from that college, with really, again, a joint body with representation from both entities. And so the primary responsibility for that local advisory panel, they're going to be working with the high schools as they've kind of agreed to the local implementation requirements to collect syllabi competency spreadsheets. They'll be taking processes to approve those courses and also deciding which courses will be submitted on to the statewide portability panel for approval as part of that structure. One of the other statewide aspects for transitional instruction is support from the state for this work. And there has been a state appropriation through the Illinois Community College Board over the last several years for supporting transitional math and transitional English. Last year, there was a Transitional English Pilot Grant Award, which provided resources and supports locally to support the development of transitional English for piloting work, kind of creating the partnerships that are needed for those local advisory panels and the course development, and also making sure that there are some regional approaches to launching this work. And the governor's budget that was recently released this week does include the proposal to continue that funding to ICCB for transitional instruction. So that's something to be on the lookout for as the work moves ahead, whether there may be continued grant resources to help this work with the local implementation. So with that, I'm happy to turn it back over to Heather as we dive in deeper into the content of Transitional English.
Thanks, John. I think there just was one question on there for you to answer about NCAA and eligibility requirements for that.
Sure. Well, in terms of the NCAA expectations and requirements, that they're generally those are tied to whether the courses are being, there are certain policies and criteria which are normally handled at the school level. So that's not a state level process. It's sort of a school and district level process. We know that many schools and districts have been able to have their equivalent of a transitional English course to be approved by the NCAA, but that is going to be important for schools to work with the NCAA around that criteria. One thing that's important to distinguish is that transitional English courses are not, they're not remediating prior content per se, right? They are courses that are addressing the competencies and policies from the state. So that's important in the framing of that to the NCAA. It's not just a duplication of prior coursework that students have had. It is actually coursework that is addressing the construct that the state has developed for the competencies and policies. And so in terms of working with the NCAA, I think that would be important to make sure that that is clarified in the local submission process.
Thanks, John. There were a few questions too, just again about English or transitional English as that fourth year course. And again, to the point I think John spoke to earlier about if a student is ready for that early college credit coursework, then that's what they should be enrolling in. Transitional English, again, is very much, and I think Judy will speak to this a bit more too in the course parameters, but it's very much for that student who kind of needs to get over a bit of that hump, right? They're almost there, they're so close to being ready, but there's just some skills, some knowledge, some experiences that they need to have in order to be really ready for that college level English course. And so it could, we see some communities where transitional English, they no longer might have a standard English 4 course. They really have just the transitional English and early college credit. But sometimes within your implementation, it might take a bit to necessarily get to that, right? But it very much, to some of the questions, it could replace that English 4 course. And then students not taking that course who are ready would be an early college credit, whether it's dual credit or AP.
Yeah, and just a couple other questions that I saw within the Q&A again, that what we are typically saying districts do is take an existing English 4 course that has no connection to college readiness or early college that is being provided, and to find ways to modify that to address the state policies and competencies. So I think that's the typical process we're seeing for the implementation of this work. I also had the question about whether or not there's do we suspect that transitional English will be a requirement for implementation? I mean, there are no discussions right now around any sort of required implementation. What I talked about before, again, beyond just better preparing your students for college level courses and providing them that guaranteed placement, though, there are connections then to ESSA and also the Community College Board's multiple measures policy that we would encourage school districts to consider around transitional English.
Wonderful. Thank you all. And again, please keep the questions coming in the Q&A and in the chat. This is very much a moment to be addressing those questions. And this is recorded. So if there's others in your network who would benefit from this information, please make sure to forward this out to them if they weren't able to attend today. But here we're going to get into some fun, exciting stuff, and you're going to hear directly from our competency development group. I'm going to spend some time just going over the background about how these were developed and some of the overview and process there, and then I'll turn it to our CDG representatives. Love to come up with acronyms in the education world, So the Competency Development Group, the CDG, as we might call it here, was convened back in fall of 2019. It feels like a minute ago, forever ago, but this is, like I said, been going on for a bit. This has been a real process and a real labor of love to develop these competencies and course parameters that you all see here today. It was no quick thing. There was a lot of thought and intention behind it. So ISB, ICCB, and IBHE convened this transitional English group, and we had high school administrators, high school teachers, community college and university administrators, community college faculty, university English faculty, and we also had our state agency representative partners on there as well. And so we met in all kinds of different spaces and ways. We met in person, wild to think about, right? We had 2 really robust and collaborative in-person meetings. but we also met consistently via webinars. So from December through April, we really took, and how we began this work is looking across the group at the different secondary and post-secondary learning objectives and outcomes. And from there started to come to an understanding of where are we meeting the objectives to be college ready, where are we not, which ones do we really feel we want to make sure we call out within transitional English. And then we broke into small domain teams. So once our representatives start speaking to you here, you're going to hear about 5 different main components of transitional English. And so we had 5 different working groups who really met in small teams to initially draft the content and process competencies. And then we collaborated and brought that back for feedback to the whole group. We had multiple drafts, multiple opportunities for comment. It was a really collaborative, robust process. We looked at a lot of different things. So along with each representative kind of bringing in the secondary and post-secondary learning objectives from their own space, we also looked at the secondary English language arts standards. So we get the question a lot about how this might be aligned to those, and they were very much considered and embedded throughout the competencies and performance indicators that you'll hear about. We also looked at the transitional English pilots. As John mentioned, the ICC grant that was out there, there are folks who are doing this and they've been doing it for a while. And we looked at what are their learning objectives, what are their instructional approaches, what seems to already be working on the ground in these pilot communities. And then as always, looking at best practices within Illinois and across the nation to understand, again, how are we really preparing students to move into college level English? And so the finalization of these competencies also went through a process from June 1st through June 31st in 2020. And public comment and feedback was invited on those draft course parameters and competencies. And once that was all taken in, we had representatives from the CDG come back together as a team to look at the public comment received, review, determine where that needs to be incorporated, where adjustments need to be made. And then that draft was sent to a statewide panel for transitional instruction. They convened this past September. They looked at the competencies, course parameters, and that's when we really dove deeply and looked at those general policies. And if you're familiar with transitional math, there's a lot of similarities there, but there's also some very unique key points that are specific to transitional English. That was sent off to our state agency partners for approval. And in this past January, it was approved. And here we are in this moment with you all to discuss it. And so now what we're going to do is take some time and really dive into those course parameters and competencies for transitional English. And those of you who are familiar with the document and those of you who might not be, we're really thinking about this graphic and thinking about the incorporation of all of these as you would build out a transitional English course. And so your content competencies would be the areas of reading, critical thinking and analysis, and writing. These would be those competency areas, those domains that are directly assessed for students. But we also embedded those process competency domains, so metacognition and essential skills, to really be embedded throughout. And so they may not be directly assessed, but they are embedded and they are incorporated throughout the other domains and throughout a student's experience in transitional English. And so here with us today, we have 5 representatives from our competency development group, and I've listed them here in order of presentation. And I will let them each introduce themselves before they begin their section. But first, we are going to turn it over to Judy.
Thanks, Heather. Thanks, John, for the opportunity again to speak to the program, the project. It's an honor. For sure. So I am Judy Nichols. I teach English at Harper College. While my training is in literature, I've taught composition, including basic writing, or what others may call developmental English, for 15 years at the community college level. And I had another great honor to work with District 211 to create a successful transition English course that's now in its 7th year. Wow. So I'm going to be speaking to the points on this slide, drawing on that context of developing that transition program. So we can jump into the slide. Am I in the right place? So just to speak generally to transition English courses, and some of this stuff John has already spoken to, but just to emphasize it, because I think it can be can feel like a strange beast at first because you're collaborating with high school folks and post-secondary folks are collaborating to create a course, but it is fundamentally different than something like dual credit or AP. So Transition English offers students opportunities to develop college-ready skills through readings and tasks that are both challenging and relevant to them. So it's a careful balance of crafting a course that's rigorous, academically rigorous or professionally rigorous, but also recognizes the students' interests, goals, and existing literacies. Again, Transition English is not dual credit. It is not AP English. It's quite simply senior year English for students who really haven't had access to a more rigorous experience because the assumption was because they were struggling with some skills, they weren't prepared for that. So what this course does is it provides them with rigor and support at the same time. And students in the course will struggle, and they're going to struggle for some time. It's not unusual to struggle for about 2/3 of the course. So really student success in my project and 211 projects experience is that it's most meaningfully assessed in the final weeks of the course rather than at earlier points in the semester. Not that those assessments aren't important, but it may just feel a little different in the sense where a teacher might be used to scaffolding an assignment, checking for success or mastery, and then moving on. There's a lot of recursiveness built into the coursework so that students can continue to struggle for some time, just because the skills are pretty challenging. And then lastly, and importantly, the Transition English curriculum is strongest when high school and college faculty collaborate with each other. So we have distinct experiences on both sides of the fence, and it's really important when we share those expertise and our dedication to the students. In that way, we're always going to create a really powerful and effective course for them. So my colleagues are going to speak to these slides. I'm just going to pick out again a couple things that were relevant or stood out in the 211 Harper project. As you can see, this is giving us this awesome Venn diagram showing us the integration of many of the areas of the competency areas as well as the skills. So just for some context, for many years at community colleges, developmental reading and writing were taught in isolation of each other. Not everywhere, but pretty commonly this was done. Sometimes reading people would even be in their own department and writing people would be in their own department. This was done despite this being not one of the best practices in basic writing pedagogy or in adult literacy. So in response to this state mandate, but also just the shifting and understanding and teaching basic writing and reading, 211, our transition course adopted an integrated reading and writing approach. And this diagram definitely speaks to that integrated approach. That approach brought us a lot of success. So we were using writing to decipher and engage, students were using writing to decipher and engage with challenging readings. And then they were using reading to compose responsive and more sophisticated writing. So metacognition also came into play so that the students could really become aware and active practitioners of their new skills. So not just simply doing what they were told, but actually really engaging in a reflective process that allowed them to see that these skills were both useful, that they were in fact developing these skills and over time, and that they were needing to remind themselves of that when they encountered something particularly challenging. And then the practice of essential skills was also important because it really helped the students cultivate those soft skills that are needed for career and college success. At times, even I would be, and I'm still called in sometimes to the transition course at some of the 211 high schools to give them the hard talk of college, just to remind them that as they transition into college, there's much more expectation that they're going to be functioning like adults. So this class is can be a really incredibly effective transition for students who haven't been asked to behave in that way before. So we found both metacognitive skills and essential skills also important to the IRW approach. So we can go on to the next slide too. This slide, I think, speaks really effectively to the reading selections, and I think that can be challenging, and I know that resources will be provided so that folks have an easier time sort of deciding the readings that are appropriate. It's very hard to find that balance of rigor, but also still cultural relevance. So just as an example, the 211 teachers chose readings from the Graff and Birkenstein's They Say, I Say anthology, which provided them with some really nice topical relevant readings that were also lengthier, had lots of really great academic vocabulary, but also a lot of the really important academic moves that the students were being taught to recognize and also reproduce in their writing. So there are resources out there, I promise, though I recognize that it's a challenge really to find something that's interesting enough to keep a reluctant reader or reluctant writer going, right, when it gets hard. The next slide, please. And this is my final slide. So I am a huge believer in the assessment process that 211 and I created, and I'm going to describe that and then try to sell it to you as not just really beneficial for the students, but it's transformative, I think, for teachers as professionals, as people who practice a craft. So just to make sure the students, of course, were learning these college-ready skills, 211 and Harper faculty met monthly for several years. I want to say 3 or 4, because we're thorough, and we did this to assess the students' writing in the transition course. And these assessments were not focused on grades, they were really focused on the emergence of particular college-ready skills in the writing itself. So we grounded the idea of emergent in the rhetoric, which was really important, I think, and helped the high school folks in the room to really understand it was okay that even by the middle of the course, students hadn't mastered something, right? That the emergence and the cultivation of emergence was more critical. So we tied that, we had that emergent idea in the rubric because it was also embedded in the Harper English placement rubric. So we were just echoing our placement process there as well. And 211 and Harper, we encourage folks to really make sure that those community colleges placement process is a presence within your assessment process, just to ensure for coherence. And we think it really ensured that the students were successful because they were coming in with the skills that we were expecting to see in our placement tool. And just a final pitch for this sort of collaborative assessment. I've been teaching for a long time, 20 years now, 15 years at the community college. And I think this was one of the most transformative experiences for me, just to sit down with high school faculty to talk about what they do in a safe, administrative free space. Not that administrators aren't safe, but it can just feel like when you're among teachers, it's easier to have candid conversation and just to really learn from them about effective scaffolding, more effective reading strategies, more effective writing strategies. I am no doubt a better teacher because of those monthly meetings. And I'm incredibly grateful that my high school colleagues were so generous with their time and their expertise. And the success of our program is largely due to them. And I'll turn it back to Heather.
Thank you so much, Judy, and I appreciate your insights here. And I know there's requests for seeing some of your resources and models if you're willing to share those. So we definitely will. I mean, as we go out in the space, there's going to be the need for sharing of pilots and resources and materials and what folks are doing. So that's when we get to some next steps and continued work there. But thank you again, Judy. And I'm going to dive in here then to those 5 domain areas. And I know there's some questions too, kind of about how the competencies we have outlined here also address the Common Core learning standards. So just for each presenter, for you to kind of address those as you're going through your presentation, I think will be helpful here for folks on the line. But to begin with, we're going to start with the reading domain. And so you can see again, as Judy spoke to, there is that integration of reading and writing. And so you see them kind of lined up right next to each other. This was again, another thoughtful decision by this group to figure out how we even format these competencies to support teachers and support communities. So Megan, I'll turn to you to introduce yourself and chat about reading.
Thanks so much, Heather. Good morning, everyone. I'm Megan Knight. I'm the Director of Academic Programs and Pathways in District 214, which is located in the Northwest suburbs. I have been an administrator for, I believe this is my 9th year now, but I am an English teacher by trade. And I spent over a decade in the high school English classroom. So I was very happy and grateful to be a part of this work. As an English teacher, a former English teacher myself, and then in my role as an administrator, and really being able to see the impact that this has on the trajectory of so many students' lives. I was able to be a part of the reading subgroup, and so I'll share a few things that really are just going to reiterate what was shared by Judy already. The integrated approach was something that we definitely felt was very important. And again, as Heather pointed out, you can see the reading and writing competencies side by side. There were really two big ideas in our reading conversation that centered around the nature of the course and then the development of the competencies themselves. So the first is that, we know reading is not just a receptive process, it is an active process. And we want students to not just be able to read the words off of the page, but to make meaning from them. So how could we develop competencies that would ask them to do just that? And then over the duration of the course, increase the text complexity of what they're being presented with to continue to grow, in that space. The second piece for us with regard to reading was really the balance and balancing the challenge of articulating the skills in a way that would allow teachers to teach them, making them clear, but then also not taught in isolation. So we didn't want this to be a siloed approach where we'll teach this skill on this day and this skill on this day. We wanted to make sure that, again, there was that integration within the competencies and the instruction of them themselves. What we tried to do was to build in autonomy for teachers that would allow them to be able to directly instruct, give students opportunities to practice the skills, provide feedback to the students, and then ultimately assess them. And those are some of the pieces that that we, again, really kind of thought through as we went through the process. It's the performance indicators that are much more specific and allow then teachers to be able to kind of point to the places where their students are succeeding, and then also point to the places where their students need some additional work, and then to go through that metacognition process with the students themselves as they are developing in their skill set. So those are some of the pieces that factored into our reading conversation. And I believe one of my colleagues is going to speak about writing.
Yes, thank you so much, Megan. And we now turn to Magdalene to introduce yourself and talk us through the writing pieces here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Magdalene Hellwig. I am the writing program director at Western Illinois University. So I teach developmental writing, I teach first year writing, I teach professional writing. So I teach writing at all levels for our college students. And I want to echo what Judy said, that working on this project was really transformative for me, being able to talk to educators from across the state at all different types of institutions, which is something I think we don't do enough of in the state. And I'm hoping that this is sort of the start of a more collaborative teaching process for us. So with writing, I'm gonna just address why we sort of focused on the rhetorical skills. And that is as we talked about what we saw in common among our students who were not placing directly into our first year writing classes, what we saw as sort of missing elements were the ability to look at a writing task and understand what they were being asked to do, who they were being asked to address, and what other contextual issues might be have bearing on the way they write the text. Also, most first-year writing classes in Illinois are focused rhetorically. So we really wanted to pull in those concepts and make sure that students had sort of the base understanding of audience, purpose, and context as sort of the structure within which you make choices as a writer whenever you're writing anything. And the other aspect that we wanted to emphasize, and this is similar to the emergence that Judy was talking about, is flexibility, the ability to take skills learned in one context and move them into a different context, and to make choices about what might have worked in one context and how to adapt it into a different context. So we really focused on the core sort of rhetorical situation. And if you look more deeply at the performance indicators, you'll see that students are asked to make writing process choices, to make choices about tone and diction and organization, all based on those rhetorical factors. I think another thing that I want to emphasize here is that we're hoping that these transitional English classes can pull on all kinds of texts, literary, non-literary, texts in various media, and give students the opportunity to write lots of different types of texts, to practice writing for different audiences, to practice writing for different purposes, and to even practice remixing, right? So taking one text that they've written and rewriting it to address a totally different audience for a totally different purpose, so that they begin to see themselves as writers who have real control over what they're saying and how they're saying it. And then finally, I think there's a performance indicator that talks about students being able to see themselves as contributors to a larger conversation as writers. And that's something that's very important as for students to see that writing has a purpose beyond simply demonstrating understanding or awareness, but that writing allows you to communicate ideas, and that the process of writing is something that allows you to create ideas and then to pull them forward into the larger community. So we're hopeful that these will encourage students to think about themselves as writers in a community, in various communities.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lynn. And I would say I personally learned a lot. Brought me back to English class in high school here working with you all. So thank you so much for that. I'm going to move here then to our critical thinking and analysis space. And we have Michael to share with us. And I'll let them introduce themselves and talk us through this year.
I'm Michael Dufresne. I'm a professor at DeVry University and based in the Chicago area, but I work with a national team currently on curriculum development across the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, so everything from humanities to professional and technical writing. And across my career at DeVry, well, I began as a high school teacher, but much of my time at DeVry has been in guiding faculty to help students be successful, and now more specifically developing curriculum to that effect as well. So this slide continues with the reading and writing focus with number 2. And what you'll see in number 3 is, and the critical thinking part of things, is it all really overlaps. And one of our greatest challenges as a team was to try to parse out how is X different from Y, and everything does overlap. That Venn diagram, I think, is essential to any teacher will recognize that there must be critical thinking, decisions being made, analysis and synthesis and all of this in every part of every academic endeavor. So just very briefly, I'm going to echo what Madeline and Megan said in terms of making those choices and seeing ourselves, as having our students see themselves as members of the community, as people who aren't just performing a task like 2 + 2 = 4, not to downplay the importance of math, but it isn't just a functional thing. It is a thinking activity where we have to recognize in this rhetorical situation, we have a purpose, we have an audience, and we have to address our purpose to our specific audience. We have to make our message be remixable, know how to differently address a different audience or a different purpose or a different rhetorical context. So thus we're looking at the community aspects of it. How am I as a reader engaging in this community? Which sources do I read? And which sources do I perhaps not read because they have certain qualities or lack thereof? As a writer, what is my role in contributing to what other people will read? How can I integrate different sources to inform myself as a consumer? How can I integrate different sources to inform my own argument, my own position as I produce information for others? So all of that higher level critical thinking we need students to do. And, you know, I certainly see it in my 100 level classes where students come in and they say, just tell me what I need to do. And they're just going to check off the rubric points without really engaging their brain. So I definitely, if we can encourage students at the high school level as they prepare for college to use their brain beyond just performing menial tasks, then we will have a much better communicator and more effective college student.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Michael. And so that covers the content domains and really looking at those core contents that'll be assessed throughout the Transitional English course. And I'm going to turn it over here to Allison, who's going to walk us through both the metacognition and those essential skill competencies that, again, should be embedded throughout, but may not be directly assessed within the course, but very much an incorporated component. So Allison, I'll let you introduce yourself and take it from here.
Thanks, Heather. Hi, everybody. I'm Allison Douglas. I am an English professor at Elgin Community College. Amazingly, I just did the math. I've actually been at ECC for 23 years, which does not seem humanly possible. So all you young ones, it goes really fast. I teach developmental composition, and I also teach our college level writing courses. And I'm also have the privilege of being our director of our college readiness program. So I worked with our 4 high school districts for 13 years, trying to build the kinds of relationships and collaboration that we need for these kinds of courses. Honestly, this course has been a dream of ours for years. And I am super grateful that the state has decided to say, thou shalt, so that we can actually get it done, because you know, things that we don't have to do don't always happen, just saying. In terms of both the metacognition, and I'm going to speak both to the metacognition and the essential skills pieces here, but really important to think about that diagram again that we keep popping up there, that the metacognition and the essential skills are kind of going around that circle. And that was one of those things that as we worked on as a big group, we really had to figure out, okay, how do we fit that in so it's not an add-on, but that it's the way we do business. And so we really wanted to emphasize that those essential skills, metacognition, are both they're habits of minds. They're the kinds of things that as a college professor, those are kind of the make or break it things for these students, right? If they do those and they've got those and they have the capacity for that, then the reading and the writing skills come along because of those essential skills and that metacognition. But if they don't have those essential skills and metacognition, then the reading and the writing and the critical thinking are just, like Michael said, it's checking a box. It's just trying to accomplish the skill. So we really saw those pieces as partly pedagogical approach, partly instructional philosophy, all about how we get the students to develop those skills. And again, these things are not, they're not going to be tested or individually assessed. Our focus here is on the student development and growth in this area. They're not going to master these because none of us master these. This is ongoing. This is, you know, these are good student behaviors. but we do want to make sure that both of those things are explicitly addressed during the course, all throughout the course, both in the reading and in the writing. So on the metacognition side, we're really talking about helping students to think about their learning as a process and to come at it from an asset-based perspective. So rather than looking at a score or looking at a test or looking at an essay and saying, oh, I'm a really bad writer or I'm a really bad reader, to help them build from an asset perspective and say, okay, where am I developing and where am I growing and what did I do that worked well and what do I want to adjust next time, so that we're helping them to develop more of a sense of their own power as learners, and that they're not just waiting for the teacher to say, okay, now do a peer editing, right? But that they're really thinking through what works for me and how does that work for me. And I think in the metacognition area, it's also really important that we're asking them to reflect on their own processes and to recognize that my process might be different than Judy's process, and what works really well for Judy might not work for me, and that's okay, right? There's lots of different ways to go about this, and we want the students, especially because as they move into college, they're going to need to be able to say, didn't do well on that. What do I need to do differently? What did I forget to do? So that the process becomes the real driver of all of their learning. The transfer thing, I also want to really hit hard here. Again, in bringing in texts and in thinking about text and in thinking about processing and metacognition, we would hope that this course would include encouraging students to think about how they do transfer what they're doing in their English class to their science class, their they don't take sociology, their history class, whatever classes they are taking, so that they're still processing. Okay, I had to write a paper, I had to give a speech, I had to do a presentation. How did that go? Did I use the things I learned in English? Because at the college level, we see the same thing that y'all see at the high school level, which is they look at the history teachers and say, I don't have to do that. This is an English class. And we really want them to understand that reading and writing and thinking and speaking and listening aren't things that happen in the English class, but they're things that happen throughout lives because they're part of communication. Okay, so there's metacognition, I think. All right, and again, essential skills, you're not assessing these individually. This is a process of growth. We're integrating this in the reading and the writing. So again, we want to address these things explicitly. And these are those good student behaviors. These are what we expect that students do, but they're always developing. And so we're looking for, how you doing on persisting, when do you give up and why are you giving up, and what can we do to develop that? So some days I'm going to give up, but how do I process that back, and how do I think about how do I not give up next time, or how do I go a little farther? It's like running 3 miles. We want to think about these essential skills too as you select text and as you think about writing assignments. Where can they be processing some of these things and analyzing some of these things in the process of doing their reading, writing, thinking, speaking, listening kinds of things. And these are also things that students can process together as either in small groups individually or even as large groups. So when conflicts arise, when with the topics that they're dealing with, that you can actually stop and process how they're processing and how they're thinking about things, and how did you handle that conflict, and how could we do that better? How could you look at this from a different perspective? All those kinds of things, so that they're very explicit, and we're not just assuming that students are going to figure this out because we brought in a text by Toni Morrison, but that we're actually directly addressing it and saying, okay, when we look at this text, we need to be able to look at this from several perspectives, and so that it's conscious and it's explicit, and we're making clear to students that these are the kinds of things that successful college students develop. Okay, that's me, Heather.
Wonderful. Thank you, Allison. And thank you to all of our CDG representatives. I feel like I learn something new every time I listen to you all and think about another way of thinking about transitional English and some best practices. So as always, appreciate you all for taking the time today and sharing with us those insights and the work. I will say, and I think you heard from every speaker here, that this is a transformative process. This is, a process that takes time. It takes building up collaboration and trust and looking at all these different materials and understanding what we're doing in this course to implement it. And I know we get questions a lot about creating those relationships, creating that process. And I would say that it is a process, right? To build relationships and build collaboration and build trust. But you've heard from everyone here how transformative it has been for their teaching, how they're thinking about supporting students, and what this course can mean to really prepare students to be ready for that day one success when they get to their college level courses. So while it's not always a straightforward, easy, simple process, it's a very meaningful one, a very important one, and it could really change the trajectory of students as they move on to their post-secondary education. So encourage you all, to connect with different CDG members here. If that's something, you want to discuss further, connect with me, connect with our state agency partners, right? This is a process, and there's a lot of communities who are doing it and who are doing it really well and have a lot of learnings and insights to share. And so with that, there are next steps. Now that has been approved by the state, we will be establishing a statewide portability panel and develop those documentation requirements and prepare for a fall 2021 panel. So those communities who have been implementing for multiple years and are prepared to submit for that statewide portability approval, our first panel will be in fall of 2021. We're also going to start regular convenings of an advisory group that will have representatives from secondary and post-secondary institutions to provide guidance on what professional development, what curricular resources should look like for transitional English to support teachers and communities. And so that'll be something that'll be rolling out too as we move into this next school year, and just thinking through how are we getting these, people are asking, well, what did Harper do? What are you all up to? How did it look at 214? Getting some of those best practices together and sharing that out more broadly with the field to support you all as you are implementing in your spaces. And I know we've had a lot of questions here, and we are right at just about 11 o'clock, but wanted to provide some additional contact information here. These are the state agency contacts for Transitional English. You heard them at the welcome, and just wanted to make sure that their information was included here for you all if you have questions. And thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you to all the panelists.